A karate champion publicly humiliates what he thinks is just another elderly Asian man at a community fundraiser, demanding a fight to prove the old-timer doesn't belong. The arrogant fighter towers over his target, flexing for the crowd as he mocks traditional martial arts as dancing for grandpas. But this quiet volunteer isn't just some helpless senior citizen. This is Jackie Chan himself. The bully has no idea he just challenged a living legend who spent 50 years turning everyday objects into deadly weapons and making impossible stunts look effortless. While the champion boasts about his regional titles, the martial arts master calmly removes his cardigan, and the elderly veterans in the crowd start to smile. The young fighter's students keep cheering, thinking they're about to watch their teacher destroy another weak old man. But they're actually witnessing the moment their hero picks a fight with cinematic royalty. What happens when raw arrogance meets 5 decades of perfected skill? Will the champion survive learning why some legends earned their reputation the hard way? What happened next would shatter the bully's ego for the rest of his pathetic existence. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The ancient boiler in the Riverside Community Center's basement had been singing the same off-key melody for 3 decades, but Jackie Chan knew exactly which wrench would silence its morning complaints. At 6:30 a.m., while Queen still slept under a blanket of October fog, he moved through the building's corridors with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood that small acts of service often mattered most. Mr. Chun, as everyone knew him, here, carried his worn toolbox up the narrow stairs, pausing to replace a burnt-out bulb in the main hallway. His 70-year-old hands worked with surprising steadiness, threading the new bulb into place with the same precision he'd once used. For far more spectacular feats, the morning light filtered through dust-streaked windows, illuminating a space that had seen better decades but still radiated warmth. Margaret Walsh found him in the main hall, methodically arranging folding chairs in perfect rows. Her gray hair caught the early sunlight as she shook her head in amazement. "You know you don't have to do all this, Mr. Chun. We have other volunteers." Jackie smiled, his weathered face creasing with genuine warmth. "Early bird catches the worm, Mrs. Walsh. Besides, these old bones need the exercise." She watched him work, noting how he moved with an almost dance-like grace despite his age. In 6 months of volunteering, he'd never missed a day, never complained, never asked for recognition. He simply appeared each morning like a guardian angel in button-down shirts and comfortable slacks, making their struggling community center function a little better than it had the day before. "Tonight's fundraiser has me worried," Margaret admitted, settling into one of the chairs he'd arranged. "The building needs so many repairs, and that developer has been sniffing around again. Sometimes I wonder if we're fighting a losing battle." Jackie paused in his chair arranging, his kind eyes focusing on her with sudden intensity. "Every battle worth fighting feels impossible at the beginning, Mrs. Walsh. But community is stronger than money." Through the large windows facing the street, movement caught his attention. Across the way, several young men in black uniforms were positioning a large sign in front of what had been an empty storefront. The bold letters spelled out Kellerman's Combat Academy in aggressive red font, and the muscular blond man directing the installation gestured with the sharp, controlled movements of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Jackie watched the scene unfold with growing unease. The way the blond man carried himself, the expensive equipment being moved into the space, the calculated positioning of the sign to dominate the street view. It all suggested someone with ambitions that extended beyond teaching martial arts. "New neighbors," Margaret observed, following his gaze. "I tried to introduce myself last week, but they weren't very welcoming." The blond man across the street turned toward their building, his gaze sweeping over the community center with the cold assessment of a predator evaluating prey. For just a moment, his eyes seemed to lock with Jackie's through the window. The younger man's expression shifted into something that might have been amusement, as if he found the sight of an elderly Asian man arranging chairs particularly entertaining. Jackie continued setting up tables with practiced efficiency, but his movements had acquired a subtle tension. In his long experience, trouble usually announced itself before it arrived. And as he watched the Martial Arts Academy's grand opening preparations, He couldn't shake the feeling that tonight's peaceful fundraiser was about to become something far more complicated. The sound of fists striking heavy bags echoed through Kellerman's Combat Academy like thunder, punctuated by Bryce Kellerman's sharp commands to his advanced students. At 28, he moved through his dojo with the swagger of a man who'd never met a challenge he couldn't dominate. The mirrored walls reflected his powerful frame as he demonstrated a brutal takedown technique. His victim, a reinforced training dummy that absorbed punishment with stoic silence. Power through the resistance, Bryce shouted, his voice carrying across the pristine training floor. In real combat, your opponent won't tap out. They'll keep fighting until you make them stop. His students watched with the reverence reserved for conquering heroes. Trophy cases lined the walls, filled with evidence of Bryce's regional championships and tournament victories. Everything in the academy gleamed with expensive newness, top-of-the-line equipment, professional lighting, and a sound system that made his voice boom with authority. Randy Phillips, his assistant instructor, approached during a water break. "Boss, we've got 3 more parents asking about the kids' program. They're concerned about the intensity level." Bryce toweled off his face, his expression hardening. "Intensity builds character, Randy. These kids live in a soft world. Someone needs to teach them that weakness gets you eaten alive." He gestured toward the window facing the community center. "Look at that place. Full of people who gave up, who accepted defeat. That's what happens when you don't demand excellence." Randy followed his gaze to the modest building across the street, where an elderly man was visible through the windows, quietly going about some maintenance task. Maybe they're just doing their best with what they have. Their best isn't good enough. Bryce's voice carried the certainty of someone who'd built his identity around being stronger than everyone else. "My investor sees the potential in this neighborhood. Prime real estate wasted on people who can't fight for what they want." The mention of his investor always made Bryce stand a little straighter. Victor Hawthorne had appeared 6 months ago with an offer that seemed too good to be true. Unlimited funding for expansion, connections to city officials, and a partnership that would make Bryce the dominant martial arts presence in Queens. All he had to do was establish his academy's reputation and help Hawthorne acquire certain properties that were being underutilized. Through the window, Bryce watched the elderly Asian man continue his careful work. Something about the way the old-timer moved bothered him. Too fluid, too controlled for someone who should be shuffling around with a walker. It reminded him of something he couldn't quite place, an instinct that whispered warnings his ego refused to hear. "Tonight's their big fundraiser," Bryce said, his tone suggesting an opportunity rather than a social event. "Maybe it's time we introduced ourselves properly. Show the neighborhood what real strength looks like." Randy shifted uncomfortably. "You sure that's a good idea? These are just community people, families and seniors." Bryce's smile held no warmth. "Exactly. Easy targets who need to learn that weakness has consequences." He turned back to his students, clapping his hands sharply. "All right, ladies. Break time's over. Let's see some real fighting." As the sound of combat resumed, Bryce kept glancing toward the community center. The old man had disappeared from the window, but somehow Bryce felt like he was still being watched. He shook off the feeling and focused on his students, pushing them harder, demanding more aggression, more dominance. Tonight would be perfect for demonstrating why Kellerman's Combat Academy represented the future, while that pathetic community center represented the past. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows between the two buildings, and for just a moment, those shadows seemed to flicker with the promise of collision. By 7 o'clock, the Riverside Community Center had transformed into a warm haven of community spirit. The scent of homemade casseroles and fresh bread filled the air as neighbors who'd known each other for decades shared tables with young families just discovering the neighborhood's heart. Margaret Walsh stood at the small podium, her voice carrying easily across the modest crowd as she thanked the volunteers who kept their community alive. "And special recognition goes to our maintenance angel, Mr. Chun," she announced, gesturing toward Jackie's table. "6 months ago, our boiler was singing opera every morning. Now it purrs like a kitten." Jackie stood briefly, offering a modest wave before settling back beside his table mates. 3 Korean War veterans whose combined age exceeded 250 years. Frank Morrison, 89 and sharp as his old drill sergeant's whistle, nudged Jackie with his elbow. You're too humble, Chun. That boiler was ready for last rites before you worked your magic. Eddie Rodriguez, 72, and still wearing his maintenance uniform from the office building where he worked, laughed. Frank's right. My building super could learn a thing or two from your touch with machinery. George Patterson, 85, and the quietest of the three, simply nodded his approval while methodically working through a plate of Mrs. Kim's homemade dumplings. The Korean woman had claimed the table beside theirs, surrounded by other elderly immigrants who'd made America their home through decades of hard work and determination. Children played quietly in the corners while their parents discussed everything, from school board elections to the rising cost of groceries. The conversation flowed in multiple languages: Spanish, Korean, English, creating a symphony of community that had sustained this neighborhood through countless challenges. The peaceful atmosphere cracked like glass when the front door opened. With unnecessary force, Bryce Kellerman entered first, his black academy jacket marking him as clearly as a uniform. Three of his top students followed, young men who'd learned to mirror their instructor's aggressive confidence. They surveyed the room with barely concealed disdain, their body language broadcasting superiority over every gray head and modest. Table setting. Wow. Bryce announced to no one in particular, his voice carrying across conversations. This is what passes for entertainment around here. Margaret approached them with diplomatic grace, offering dinner plates. Welcome. We're so glad to have new neighbors. There's plenty of food, and the silent auction has some wonderful, we're not here to bid on garage sale leftovers, Bryce interrupted, picking up a hand-knitted scarf from the auction table. This neighborhood needs businesses that actually contribute to the economy, not this. The room's temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Conversations stuttered and died as people registered the hostility in their uninvited guests. Mrs. Kim looked up from her table, confusion and hurt flickering across her weathered features as Bryce continued his commentary. Jackie watched the interaction with growing tension, his hands resting calmly on the table despite the anger building in his chest. Beside him, Frank Morrison's jaw tightened with the muscle memory of confronting bullies in uniform when Mrs. Kim approached Bryce. With her pride and joy, an intricate quilt that had taken her 6 months to complete, the collision became inevitable. Very beautiful, she said in careful English, holding up the quilt to show its delicate patterns. I make for community, for families who need. Lady, this belongs in a dumpster, Bryce laughed, his students joining in. Who's going to pay? Money for amateur craft hour projects. The cruel words hit Mrs. Kim like physical blows. Her hands trembled as she lowered the quilt, and Jackie saw tears forming in her proud eyes. Around the room, the community's collective intake of breath created a moment of crystalline silence. Jackie excused himself from the veterans' table and approached the group with measured steps, his voice carrying the gentle authority of someone accustomed to defusing dangerous situations. Sir, Mrs. Kim worked very hard on her beautiful quilt. Perhaps you and your friends would be more comfortable returning when you can show proper respect for our hosts. Bryce turned toward the elderly Asian man with predatory interest, recognizing opportunity in the same instinct that had guided him through countless tournament victories. Here was someone perfect for a demonstration, small, old, foreign, and apparently naive enough to challenge him publicly. The room's attention focused on their confrontation like iron filings drawn to a magnet. Grandpa, Bryce said, his voice dripping with manufactured patience, I don't think you understand who you're talking to. I'm a regional martial arts champion. Maybe you should stick to whatever it is you do here, mopping floors. Jackie's expression remained serene, but something subtle shifted in his posture. The veterans at his table recognized the change immediately. Frank Morrison had seen that same stillness in soldiers' moments before combat, while Eddie Rodriguez remembered it from the construction sites where men settled disputes with more than words. I understand perfectly, Jackie replied, his slight accent making each word carefully chosen. You are someone who has forgotten that strength serves others, not the ego. The insult landed like a slap. Bryce's students shifted closer, their body language turning aggressive as their instructor's face flushed with anger. Margaret Walsh stepped forward, trying to defuse the situation, but Bryce was already committed to his course. You know what, old man? I think this community needs a lesson in reality. Bryce addressed the room now, his voice carrying to every corner. You people live in a fantasy where everyone gets participation trophies and nobody keeps score. But the real world doesn't work that way. He turned back to Jackie, his smile holding all the warmth of winter steel. So here's my offer, Grandpa. You think you can lecture me about strength? Let's settle this the traditional way. You and me, right here, right now. When I'm done with you, maybe everyone will understand why this neighborhood needs real warriors, not nursing home refugees. The challenge hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Margaret reached for Jackie's arm, whispering urgently that he didn't need to prove anything to anyone. The veterans' table had gone silent, three old soldiers recognizing the moment. When diplomacy failed and other solutions became necessary, Jackie gently patted Margaret's hand and stepped away from her protective gesture. You wish to demonstrate strength through violence against your elders? I wish to demonstrate reality. Bryce shot back. This is what happens when weakness meets power. Maybe watching you get humbled will teach these people that nice words. Don't stop strong men from taking what they want. Around the room, phones appeared as the confrontation drew spectators from the hallway and adjacent rooms. Word spread quickly through the building. The martial arts instructor from across the street was picking a fight with Mr. Chun, the quiet volunteer who fixed their boiler and never asked for anything in return. Jackie surveyed the crowd. Children, pressed against their parents, elderly faces tight with worry, young adults torn between fascination and concern. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about whether bullies could invade their safe space and terrorize vulnerable people without consequence. Very well, Jackie said simply. But we fight with respect, yes? First to pin or submit. No unnecessary injury. Bryce's laugh was sharp and ugly. Don't worry about unnecessary injury, Grandpa. I'll try to leave you conscious enough to apologize. As the room rearranged itself into an impromptu arena, Jackie removed his light cardigan and folded it carefully, revealing the simple button-down shirt and slacks of a man who dressed for volunteer work, not combat. Beside him, Bryce stripped to his t-shirt, his muscled torso drawing appreciative murmurs from his students. The contrast was stark and seemingly decisive. Youth versus age, strength versus frailty, predator versus prey. But Frank Morrison, watching from his chair with the trained eye of someone who'd seen real warriors in action, noticed something the others missed. As Jackie assumed his fighting stance, the old veteran smiled grimly and whispered to his tablemates, "That boy has no idea what he just stepped into." The community center's main hall fell silent except for the whisper of sneakers against linoleum, as Bryce and Jackie circled each other in the hastily cleared space. Folding chairs formed an uneven perimeter around the combatants, filled with faces ranging from worried elderly residents to excited teenagers holding up phones. Margaret Walsh stood near the emergency exit, one hand on the door handle in case medical attention became necessary. Bryce moved with the calculated aggression of a tournament fighter, his muscles coiled and ready to unleash the devastating combinations that had earned him 3 regional championships. He studied his opponent with predatory patience, cataloging apparent weaknesses, the slight frame, the age-spotted hands, the way Jackie seemed to barely be paying attention to the threat in front of him. "Last chance to back down, Grandpa," Bryce called out, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "I don't want to hurt you in front of your friends." Jackie's response was a gentle smile and an almost imperceptible shift in his stance that only the veterans recognized as significant. Eddie Rodriguez leaned forward in his chair, something familiar nagging at the edges of his memory as he watched the older man's positioning. Bryce launched his attack with explosive force, throwing a lightning-fast combination designed to overwhelm and intimidate. His right cross cut through the air where Jackie's head had been a split second before, followed by a left hook that found only empty space. Jackie had moved, not stepped back or ducked away, but somehow flowed around the punches like water finding the path of least resistance. The missed combination left Bryce slightly off balance, his momentum carrying him forward into what should have been a devastating follow-up. Instead, he stumbled as Jackie's gentle touch redirected his energy, sending him past his target and into an embarrassing recovery that drew murmurs from the watching crowd. "What the hell?" Bryce muttered, resetting his stance with less confidence than before that he tried again, this time leading with a powerful front kick aimed at Jackie's midsection. The kick was technically perfect, the kind of strike that had floored opponents half Bryce's age in sanctioned competitions. Jackie caught the incoming foot with both hands, twisted slightly, and sent Bryce spinning in a graceful pirouette that ended with the younger man facing the wrong direction entirely. The crowd's murmurs grew louder. This wasn't going according to anyone's expectations. Bryce's face flushed with anger and confusion as he realized his opponent hadn't even attempted to strike back. Jackie was simply playing with him, deflecting every attack with movements that seemed choreographed rather than combative. It was like fighting smoke. Everything he threw passed harmlessly through his target without making contact. Desperation crept into Bryce's technique as he unleashed a flurry of strikes, punches and kicks flowing together in the complex combinations that had made him famous in regional circuits. But Jackie moved through the assault like he was performing a dance, his body bending and swaying in ways that seemed to defy the limitations of age and physics. When Bryce threw a particularly aggressive roundhouse kick, Jackie ducked under it and somehow ended up behind his opponent, tapping him gently on the shoulder as if to say hello. The casual gesture sent ripples of shocked laughter through the crowd and turned Bryce's embarrassment into rage. "Stop playing around," Bryce shouted, whirling to face Jackie again. "Fight me like a man." But as he spun, he caught sight of the watching faces, children wide-eyed with wonder, teenagers filming with obvious excitement, elderly residents who were no longer worried but fascinated. For the first time in his adult life, Bryce Kellerman was not the most impressive person in the room. Jackie stood calmly in the center of the makeshift arena, breathing easily despite the extended exchange. His hair wasn't even mussed, and that gentle smile never wavered. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't a fight between equals. It was something else entirely. Bryce's breathing came in sharp bursts as sweat beaded on his forehead, a stark contrast to Jackie's composed demeanor. The regional champion had never faced an opponent who made him look clumsy without landing a single offensive strike. Frustration boiled over into reckless aggression as he abandoned technique for raw power, throwing haymaker punches with the desperation of a drowning man. Jackie's response transformed the community center into something magical. He began incorporating the environment around them with fluid creativity that defied explanation. When Bryce threw a wild right cross, Jackie ducked and rolled across a nearby folding table, using its surface to pivot and change direction mid-motion. The elderly audience gasped as their quiet volunteer displayed agility that belonged to someone a quarter his age. A metal folding chair became Jackie's dance partner as Bryce charged forward with a tackle attempt. Jackie lifted the chair with one hand, using it to redirect Bryce's momentum while simultaneously vaulting over the frustrated fighter's back. The movement was so smooth and unexpected that several people applauded involuntarily, treating the confrontation more like performance art than combat. "How is he doing that?" Randy Phillips whispered to another Academy student, his voice carrying the bewilderment they all felt watching their invincible instructor being systematically embarrassed. Bryce grabbed another chair, wielding it like a weapon as he swung wildly at his elusive target. Jackie responded by sliding under a nearby table on his knees, popping up on the other side with a grin that suggested he was genuinely enjoying himself. The table became a barrier that Jackie used to control distance, always staying just out of reach while making Bryce's powerful strikes look ineffective and crude. The movements were becoming increasingly acrobatic and unmistakably distinctive. Jackie bounced off the wall to avoid a kick, used a jump rope from the children's corner to swing out of harm's way, and at one point actually ran up the side of a bookshelf to flip over Bryce's head in a move that belonged in a movie rather than a community center. Marcus Thompson, 17 and raised on YouTube compilations of legendary martial arts moments, felt recognition dawn like sunrise. He grabbed his friend's arm, his voice rising with excitement. "Dude, those moves. I've seen those moves before." Eddie Rodriguez's memory finally clicked into place as he watched Jackie use the environment with impossible creativity. "Maria Santissima," he breathed in Spanish, crossing himself. "I know those moves from the movies." Mrs. Kim stopped worrying about her quilts and started staring at their defender with new eyes. The way he moved, the playful confidence, the impossible combination of gentleness and physical mastery. It was achingly familiar from countless Saturday afternoons spent watching action films with her late husband. Marcus stood up from his chair, his teenage voice cracking with disbelief. "Oh my God, that's Jackie Chan." The name hit the room like a thunderbolt. Phones appeared everywhere as people frantically searched for confirmation, comparing the face of their quiet volunteer to images on their screens. The whispered exclamations spread through the crowd in multiple languages. Jackie Chan. L.E.S. Jackie Chan. Jungmar Jackie Chaniai. Bryce froze mid-attack, his raised fist trembling as the implications crashed down on him. He'd just spent 10 minutes trying to beat up one of the most beloved action stars in cinema history. The man who'd made a career of making the impossible look effortless, who'd turned everyday objects into weapons in 100 films, who'd inspired generations of martial artists worldwide. Margaret Walsh's hand flew to her mouth as 6 months of interactions suddenly made perfect sense. The way he moved, his quiet confidence, his almost supernatural ability to fix anything that was broken. She'd been working alongside a living legend who was content to mop floors and arrange chairs. The crowd's amazement was palpable, but it was Bryce's expression that captured the moment's true impact. The arrogant fighter who'd entered the building to terrorize elderly residents now stood paralyzed, staring at a man whose gentle smile had acquired an entirely different meaning. Jackie hadn't even begun to fight yet, and Bryce already looked defeated. With his identity revealed, Jackie's demeanor shifted subtly but unmistakably. The playful evasion gave way to something more purposeful, though his gentle nature remained intact. He was still the same humble volunteer who'd arrived that morning to fix their boiler, but now everyone could see the legend beneath the cardigan. Bryce stood frozen, his athletic frame trembling with the weight of his catastrophic mistake. Around the room, phones captured every angle as the regional champion faced the reality of challenging a man who'd spent 50 years perfecting the art of impossible combat. I didn't know," Bryce stammered, but Jackie raised a gentle hand to stop him. "Knowledge comes from experience," Jackie said softly, his accent lending weight to the words. "Perhaps now we both learned something." The desperate final assault came without warning. Bryce, driven by panic and wounded pride, launched himself forward in a flying kick aimed directly at Jackie's head, a move designed to end fights instantly. For a heartbeat, it seemed like the powerful technique might connect. Jackie caught Bryce's extended leg midair with impossible timing, his weathered hands gripping the younger man's ankle with surprising strength. In one fluid motion that seemed to defy physics, he spun Bryce around like a dancer leading a partner, using the fighter's own momentum to control the rotation as Bryce spun helplessly. Jackie guided him toward a folding chair with the precision of a choreographer. The chair became part of the sequence as Jackie used it to redirect Bryce's descent, not to harm, but to control. A jump rope from the children's activity corner appeared in Jackie's free hand with sleight-of-hand smoothness. The entire combination took less than 10 seconds. Bryce found himself seated in the chair, the jump rope securing his wrists behind the backrest in a configuration that was completely inescapable but caused no pain or injury. He could have been positioned for a meditation session rather than defeated in combat. The room erupted in amazed applause, but Jackie immediately moved to untie his opponent, checking Bryce's wrists and ankles to ensure no harm had been done. He helped the younger man to his feet with the same care he might show an injured child, dusting off Bryce's shirt and straightening his disheveled appearance. "Strength without wisdom is just violence," Jackie said quietly, speaking directly to Bryce but allowing the room to hear. "True martial arts protects those who cannot protect themselves. It builds people up, not tears them down." Bryce's face cycled through emotions, humiliation, anger, confusion, and finally something that might have been respect. The man who'd entered the building as a conquering bully now stood before someone whose mastery made his own skills seem primitive. To everyone's surprise, Bryce bowed deeply, the formal gesture of a student acknowledging a superior teacher. I apologize. To you, to Mrs. Kim, to everyone here. I was wrong." The transformation was remarkable. Margaret Walsh stepped forward to embrace Jackie, tears streaming down her face as she thanked him for defending their community. Around the room, elderly residents who'd seemed frail and vulnerable moments before now stood with visible pride, protected by a guardian they'd never expected. The tension broke into celebration as children approached Jackie for autographs. Teenagers shared videos of the encounter, and the community center filled with laughter and wonder for one perfect moment. Justice had prevailed and their neighborhood felt safe again. The celebration's warmth evaporated the moment the community center's front door opened with calculated authority. Victor Hawthorne entered like a storm front, his expensive charcoal suit and silver hair commanding immediate attention. Behind him walked Patricia Morse, his razor-sharp attorney, clutching a leather briefcase, followed by two security guards whose presence turned the friendly gathering into something far more ominous. Hawthorne's cold blue eyes swept the room, methodically, taking inventory of the scattered chairs, the excited crowd, and most importantly, the humbled Bryce Kellerman standing beside the elderly Asian man who'd just dismantled his carefully laid plans. "Bryce," Hawthorne's voice carried the chill of winter wind. "I see you've provided exactly the demonstration we discussed." Jackie watched this new arrival with the instincts of someone who'd spent decades reading Dangerous Men. Everything about Hawthorne radiated predatory calculation, from his perfectly manicured appearance to the way he positioned himself to dominate the room's attention. Bryce straightened nervously, his earlier humility replaced by obvious fear. "Mr. Hawthorne, I can explain what happened here. No explanation necessary." Hawthorne's smile held no warmth as he gestured toward the disrupted fundraiser. "You've demonstrated perfectly that this facility cannot maintain basic order and safety. Elderly residents exposed to violence, children witnessing dangerous confrontations, complete chaos in a building that's supposed to serve the community." Margaret Walsh stepped forward, her voice shaking with growing alarm. "What are you talking about? This was just a misunderstanding that got resolved peacefully." Patricia Morse opened her briefcase with mechanical precision, extracting a thick folder of official documents. "Mrs. Walsh, I'm serving you with formal notice that this building has been cited for multiple safety violations. The City Council will vote on condemnation proceedings in exactly 30 days. The words hit the crowd like physical blows. Jackie moved closer to Margaret as she accepted the papers with trembling hands, her face going pale as she read the extensive list of alleged violations: structural defects, electrical hazards, fire code breaches, and public safety concerns. "This is impossible," Margaret whispered. "We just passed our annual inspection 3 months ago." Hawthorne's expression remained coldly professional. "Situations change, Mrs. Walsh. Buildings deteriorate. Standards evolve." His gaze swept over the elderly residents, immigrants, and working families who'd made this place their community's heart. "Perhaps it's time to accept that some things have outlived their usefulness." Jackie felt the weight of every worried face. In the room, understanding with crystal clarity that tonight's confrontation had been orchestrated from the beginning. Bryce's challenge, the public humiliation, even his own revelation, all of it had been designed to provide Hawthorne with exactly the pretext he needed. "You have 30 days to vacate," Hawthorne announced to the stunned crowd. "Use them wisely." As he turned to leave, his cold smile promised that their real fight was just beginning. The morning sun cast long shadows through Margaret Walsh's small office as she sat surrounded by the wreckage of her life's work. Legal documents spread across her desk like fallen leaves, each page documenting violations that made no sense to anyone who actually knew the building. Jackie found her there at 7 a.m., tears streaming silently down her cheeks as she held a faded photograph of a younger woman standing beside a man in military dress uniform. "Coffee," Jackie said gently, setting a steaming cup beside her elbow. "With extra sugar. Sugar helps with shock." Margaret looked up with red-rimmed eyes, accepting the warmth gratefully. "James built this place with his own hands," she whispered, holding up the photograph. "Lieutenant Colonel James Walsh, 82nd Airborne. He came back from Vietnam in 1971 with shrapnel in his leg and nightmares that wouldn't quit." Jackie settled into the chair across from her desk, noting how the office walls told the story of 50 years of service. Citizenship ceremony photos, wedding announcements, children's drawings, and thank you letters in multiple languages created a mosaic of community life that couldn't be measured in dollars. He saw how lost the returning veterans were, Margaret continued, her voice gaining strength as she shared their history. Boys who'd left as heroes and came home to protests in silence. And the immigrants, Korean families, Puerto Rican workers, everyone searching for their place in America. James said they all needed the same thing, a place to belong. She gestured toward a framed blueprint on the wall, its edges yellowed with age. He drew those plans himself, learned carpentry and electrical work through trial and error. Took him 3 years of weekends and evenings, but he built every wall, installed every outlet, painted every room. This wasn't just a building to him. It was proof that broken people could create something beautiful together. Jackie studied the building inspection reports spread across Margaret's desk, his practiced eye noting inconsistencies that revealed the corruption beneath Hawthorne's legal maneuvering. Violations cited for problems that didn't exist, inspector signatures dated on days the building had been closed for renovation, structural concerns in areas that had been recently reinforced. These inspections, Jackie said carefully, they are not accurate. Margaret's laugh held no humor. That's what I told the city inspector when he called yesterday. He said his records show multiple visits and documented violations. But I know every person who's entered this building in the past year, Mr. Chun. Half these inspectors never set foot inside. Jackie's expression darkened as he opened the folder Margaret had prepared, a collection of newspaper clippings and legal documents that painted a disturbing pattern. Hawthorne has done this before. 12 times, Margaret confirmed, her voice hollow with despair. 12 community centers across Queens and Brooklyn, all serving elderly and immigrant populations. The pattern's always the same, mysterious. Safety violations, corrupt inspections, forced sales at below-market prices. Then luxury condominiums or commercial developments that price out everyone who used to live there. She showed him photographs of demolished buildings, their rubble surrounded by construction signs bearing Hawthorne's company logo. The Sunset Senior Center in Flushing, gone. The Puerto Rican Cultural Association in Astoria, condos now. The Vietnamese Community Center in Elmhurst, a strip mall. Jackie felt the familiar fire building in his chest, the same protective fury that had driven him to stand between innocent people and those who would harm them throughout his career. But this wasn't about movie stunts or choreographed fights. This was about real families, real lives, real communities being systematically destroyed by a predator who'd turned corruption into an art form. Mrs. Walsh, Jackie said quietly, his voice carrying new determination. Your husband built this place to prove that broken people could create something beautiful. Perhaps it is time to prove that beautiful things are worth fighting for. Outside the office window, Hawthorne's black sedan cruised slowly past the community center, its tinted windows reflecting the morning light like dead eyes surveying prey. Aki found Bryce Kellerman sitting alone in his empty dojo at 9 a.m., staring at a termination notice that might as well have been a death sentence. The Kellerman's Combat Academy sign still hung outside, but inside, the gleaming equipment and trophy cases seemed to mock their owner's sudden fall from grace. Bryce looked up as Jackie entered, his face cycling through shame, anger, and something that might have been relief. Come to gloat? Bryce asked, though his voice lacked the venom from the night before. The termination letter crumpled in his hands bore Hawthorne's corporate letterhead and a message as cold as winter steel. Partnership dissolved. All loans called in immediately. Premises to be vacated within 7 days. Come to understand, Jackie replied, settling onto a bench with the careful movements of someone who knew that patience often accomplished more than force. Last night, you were Hawthorne's weapon. Today, you are his victim. Perhaps we have more in common than you think. Bryce's bitter laugh echoed through the empty space. You want to know the truth? I never wanted to be his enforcer. 6 months ago, I was just another struggling martial arts instructor trying to make rent. Then Hawthorne shows up with unlimited funding and promises of an empire spanning 5 boroughs. He stood and walked to the window facing the community center, his reflection ghost-like in the morning glass. At first, it seemed legitimate. Business, loans, legal partnerships, connections to help me expand. But then came the favors: scout this property, pressure that business owner, make sure certain people understood they weren't wanted in the neighborhood. Jackie joined him at the window, both men looking across at the building that had become their battlefield. And you agreed because? Because I was scared, Bryce admitted, the words tearing from his throat like confessions at a deathbed. My parents died when I was 16, car accident on the BQE during a winter storm. I've been terrified of losing everything ever since. When Hawthorne offered security, I grabbed it without asking what it would cost. The revelation hung between them like a bridge neither man had expected to find. Jackie understood fear intimately, the terror of displacement he'd witnessed in his own family struggles, the protective fury that drove him to shield others from the same pain. What did he threaten you with? Jackie asked gently. Bryce pulled out his phone, showing Jackie a series of text messages that painted a picture of systematic intimidation. Photos of Bryce leaving late-night bars, doctored images suggesting steroid use, forged documents that would destroy his teaching certifications, and threats to spread rumors that would make him unemployable in the martial arts community. He said I had a choice, Bryce continued. Be his soldier or watch everything I'd built get destroyed through legal channels I couldn't fight. So I became what he needed, the neighborhood bully who would soften up properties before his official offers. Jackie studied the younger man's profile, recognizing the hollow look of someone who'd compromised his principles and found the cost unbearable. And now I'm exactly where he always planned to put me, broke, discredited, and desperate. Enough to disappear quietly. Bryce turned from the window, his expression mixing defeat with dawning determination. But maybe that's not the worst thing. Maybe it's time I remembered why I started training in the first place. Jackie smiled, seeing possibility where others might see only wreckage. Why did you start? To protect people, Bryce said simply. My little sister used to get bullied at school. I learned to fight so she'd never have to be afraid. He looked around his empty dojo, then back at Jackie. I'd forgotten that until last night. Then perhaps, Jackie said, it is time to remember. And perhaps this time, we protect people together. Outside, Hawthorne's surveillance team photographed their meeting, unaware they were documenting the birth of an alliance that would soon threaten everything the developer had built. Jackie's afternoon visit to Mrs. Kim's small apartment above her late husband's tailor shop revealed a story that cut deeper than any physical wound. The elderly woman served tea with trembling hands, her eyes still red from the humiliation she'd endured the night before. Family photographs lined every surface, graduations, weddings, grandchildren's birthdays, creating a timeline of American dreams built one careful stitch at a time. I come to America with nothing, Mrs. Kim began, her accent thick with emotion as she settled into her husband's worn recliner. 1978, so very dangerous for young women alone. My father, he sell everything. House, business, mother's jewelry. To buy me airplane ticket and $47. Jackie listened with the patience of someone who understood that some stories demanded their full telling. Through her window, he could see Hawthorne's black sedan making its slow patrol of the neighborhood, photographing buildings and taking notes on a clipboard. Immigration officer at airport. He's so young, maybe 20 years old. He asked me, what skills you have, what you bring to America. I show him my hands, all cut up from sewing needles, and I say, I make beautiful things. Mrs. Kim's weathered. Fingers traced patterns in the air, muscle memory from decades of intricate work. She showed Jackie a leather portfolio filled with yellowed newspaper clippings, her late husband's obituary, their children's honor roll certificates, thank you, letters from brides whose wedding dresses had been her masterpieces. Community center, that where I learn English. Mrs. Walsh, she's so patient, teaching me words for buttons, thread, customer. Every Tuesday night for 2 years until I speak good enough for job interviews. The parallels to Jackie's own family. History created an ache in his chest that had nothing to do with physical injury. His parents' stories of displacement in Hong Kong, the fear and hope that drove people to abandon everything familiar in search of safety and opportunity. Mrs. Kim's experience reflected millions of similar journeys across decades. My husband, he meet me at community center too, she continued, pulling out a wedding photo that showed a young Korean couple surrounded by neighbors from every corner of the world. English class, cooking class, citizenship study group. That building, it give us everything. Language, friendship, love, family. Jackie accepted another cup of tea as Mrs. Kim shared 47 years of community center memories. Her children's first steps taken in the main hall during a New Year's celebration. Holiday parties where she'd taught other immigrants her grandmother's recipes. The quilting circle that had sustained her through her husband's cancer treatment and death. Now that man, he want to tear down my whole life, Mrs. Kim said, her voice breaking. He say my quilt belong in garbage. But that quilt, I sew my grandson's baby clothes into pattern, pieces from my wedding dress, fabric from curtains my husband made for our first apartment. That quilt tells story of family surviving in new country. Through the window, Jackie watched Hawthorne's team photographing Mrs. Kim's building, their clipboards and measuring tools suggesting assessments that had nothing to do with preservation. The developer's pattern was becoming clear: target communities where language barriers and advanced age made legal resistance difficult, then use systematic intimidation to force sales at fractions of actual value. Mrs. Kim, Jackie said gently, your story is not finished. Your community is not finished. Some fights are worth everything we have. The elderly woman studied his face with eyes that had seen both cruelty and kindness across 8 decades. You really Jackie Chan? From movies? Jackie nodded. And for the first time since the previous evening, Mrs. Kim smiled. In movies, you always protect people like me. People who cannot protect themselves. Movies are just practice, Jackie replied. Real life is where it matters. Outside, Hawthorne's surveillance continued. But now they were watching a community that was beginning to understand its own strength. The transformation began quietly at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday, disguised as Mrs. Walsh's new senior wellness initiative. Jackie arrived at the community center to find Margaret setting up exercise mats in the main hall, her eyes bright with the determination of someone who decided to fight rather than surrender. Word had spread through the neighborhood's informal networks, coffee shop conversations, grocery store encounters, children carrying messages between apartments. Gentle movement class, Margaret announced to the gathering crowd of elderly residents. Mr. Chun has graciously offered to teach us some basic exercises for balance and flexibility. Jackie smiled at her diplomatic description as Frank Morrison arrived using his walker, followed by Eddie Rodriguez still in his maintenance uniform from the night shift. Mrs. Kim appeared with 3 other Korean grandmothers, while George Patterson brought his wife Helen and 2 neighbors from their senior housing complex. Within 30 minutes, 23 residents over age 65 filled the hall. Today we learned to fall safely, Jackie began, demonstrating a basic break fall that looked like gentle rolling, but actually taught proper impact distribution. In life, sometimes we must fall, but we choose how we land. What followed was martial arts training disguised as physical therapy. Jackie showed them how to redirect force rather than absorb it, turning aggressive pushes into controlled movements that left attackers off balance. Mrs. Kim learned to use her quilting stance as a defensive position, while Frank Morrison discovered his walker could become an extension of his reach rather than a limitation. Eddie, show them the maintenance technique, Jackie instructed, and the 72-year-old veteran demonstrated how to climb stairs efficiently, which happened to teach perfect footwork for advancing on an opponent. Very good for reaching high shelves, yes. The seniors caught on quickly, their minds sharp despite their aged bodies. Helen Patterson, 78 and barely 5 feet tall, giggled as she learned to use an attacker's momentum to throw someone twice her size. James always said I was good at redirecting his energy when he got stubborn, she told the group, drawing laughter that masked the deadly serious skills being transmitted. 3 p.m., Jackie's youth activity program began with Marcus Thompson and 6 other teenagers who'd been struggling with direction and discipline. Unlike the seniors' disguised training, Jackie was more direct with the younger generation, teaching them traditional forms that built character alongside physical ability. Martial arts is not about fighting, Jackie explained as Marcus worked through a basic kata. Is about discipline, respect, protection of others. You become strong not to dominate, but to serve. The teenagers embraced the philosophy with surprising enthusiasm. Marcus emerged as a natural leader, helping younger kids learn basic movements while absorbing Jackie's lessons about responsibility and honor. They practiced in the community center's basement, away from prying eyes, learning techniques that emphasized team coordination and environmental awareness. By evening, Bryce had joined the sessions, his humility genuine as he learned alongside students who range from 8 to 88 years old. Jackie paired him with the teenagers, teaching him that true mastery meant lifting others up rather than proving superiority. In my dojo, I taught them to fight, Bryce confided to Jackie during a water break. Here, you're teaching them to live. The most remarkable transformation was in Eddie Rodriguez, whose maintenance work had given him an intimate knowledge of the neighborhood's buildings and infrastructure. Under Jackie's guidance, his natural agility evolved into something approaching parkour, turning fire escapes and rooftop access into pathways that complemented Jackie's environmental fighting style. You move through city like it was jungle gym, Jackie observed approvingly as Eddie demonstrated a sequence that involved climbing, jumping, and sliding between buildings. Very useful for someone who maintains many properties. As the day ended, Margaret watched 3 generations of her community learning to protect themselves and each other. They looked stronger, more confident, more unified than they had in years. But outside, Hawthorne's surveillance team continued their documentation, unaware they were witnessing the birth of something far more dangerous than they could imagine. Linda Kowalski arrived at the Riverside Community Center on Thursday morning, with the focused intensity of a bloodhound following a scent. The investigative journalist for the Queens Daily News had built her reputation exposing corruption that others preferred to ignore, and her auburn hair was already escaping its ponytail as she balanced a messenger bag full of recording equipment. Against her hip, "Mrs. Walsh," she called out, finding Margaret in the main hall supervising what appeared to be an elderly Tai Chi class. "I'm Linda Kowalski from the Daily News. I understand you're having some trouble with building inspections." Margaret paused her conversation with Mrs. Kim, studying the journalist with the wariness of someone who'd learned that media attention could cut both ways. "What kind of trouble are you referring to, Miss Kowalski?" "The kind where inspectors find violations that don't exist," Linda replied bluntly, pulling out a thick folder. "I've been tracking Victor Hawthorne's real estate acquisitions for 8 months. Your community center fits a very disturbing pattern." Jackie approached from where he'd been adjusting the height of a basketball hoop for the afternoon's youth program. Something about the journalist's direct manner and obvious preparation impressed him. She wasn't fishing for a story, she was documenting an injustice. "Mr. Chun, right?" Linda studied Jackie's face with the sharp recognition of someone who did her homework. "I have to ask, are you actually?" "I am someone who fixes boilers and teaches gentle exercise," Jackie replied diplomatically, though his slight smile suggested she was welcome to draw her own conclusions that Linda's folder contained. A damning collection of evidence spanning 2 years of Hawthorne's operations. Property assessments that dropped mysteriously after building inspections, city council voting records that showed suspicious patterns, and bank transfers that suggested relationships between Hawthorne's companies and several municipal employees. 12. Community centers, Linda explained, spreading photographs across a folding table, all serving elderly and immigrant populations, all suddenly discovered to have extensive safety violations requiring immediate evacuation, all purchased by Hawthorne subsidiaries for 20 to 30% below market value. Margaret studied the images with growing horror, buildings she recognized from other neighborhoods, all reduced to rubble or transformed into luxury developments that bore no resemblance to their community-serving origins. The Sunset Senior Center in Flushing, Linda continued, pointing to before and after photos, served Korean War veterans and elderly Chinese immigrants for 30 years, condemned for structural issues that 3 independent engineers said didn't exist. Now it's luxury condominiums starting at $4,000 a month. Jackie examined the documentation with the methodical attention of someone accustomed to complex choreography. The paper trail revealed a sophisticated operation involving shell companies, corrupt inspectors, and political pressure applied through campaign contributions and consulting fees. "You have proof of bribery?" Jackie asked, noting specific bank transfers that coincided with favorable city council votes. "Circumstantial but compelling," Linda admitted. Hawthorne's very careful about direct payments, but his consulting contracts with relatives of city officials, his donations to specific political campaigns, and the timing of favorable decisions creates a pattern that would make federal prosecutors very interested. She showed them recorded phone conversations obtained through sources within city government, inspectors discussing violations before actually visiting properties, planning commission members coordinating their votes to benefit Hawthorne's projects, and budget meetings where community services were defunded to create pressure for property sales. The problem is proving criminal intent rather than coincidental timing, Linda explained. Hawthorne's lawyers are excellent at creating plausible deniability for everything he does. Margaret felt hope stirring for the first time since receiving the condemnation notice. What do you need from us? Documentation of every inspection inconsistency, witness statements about inspector behavior, and any evidence of direct pressure or threats, Linda replied. With your community center as the current target, we might be able to catch them in the act. Jackie nodded slowly, understanding that they were no longer just fighting for one building. They were taking on a systematic predator who'd turned community destruction into a profitable business model. Miss Kowalski, he said quietly, we will help you catch them. The small kitchen above the Chinese restaurant where Jackie rented his modest apartment had never hosted a guest like Bryce Kellerman. The former bully sat awkwardly at Jackie's simple wooden table, a container of homemade dumplings balanced carefully between his large hands like an offering at an altar. The contrast was striking. The muscular young fighter surrounded by Jackie's humble possessions, both men navigating the unfamiliar territory of mutual respect. My grandmother taught me to make these before she died, Bryce said quietly, his voice lacking its usual aggressive confidence. She always said food was the best way to apologize when words weren't enough. Jackie accepted the container with genuine warmth, noting the careful pleading and even cooking that spoke of patient instruction and loving practice. Your grandmother was wise woman. Food carries intention, yes? These dumplings, they carry good heart. The admission that followed came in fragments, Bryce's carefully constructed facade cracking under the weight of months of suppressed guilt. He told Jackie about the midnight phone calls where Hawthorne's voice carried casual threats wrapped in business language, about the doctored photographs that supposedly showed Bryce using performance-enhancing drugs, images sophisticated enough to destroy his reputation even if proven false eventually. He had recordings too, Bryce continued, his hands trembling slightly as he pulled out his phone. My voice agreeing to things I never said, spliced together from different conversations to make me sound like I was selling steroids to teenage students. Jackie listened without judgment as the young man described how Hawthorne's web of control had tightened gradually. First came the generous loan terms that seemed too good to refuse. Then the helpful introductions to city officials who could expedite permits and licensing. Finally, the gentle suggestions that certain properties in the neighborhood would be better utilized for commercial development. I told myself I was just being a good businessman, Bryce said, shame coloring every word. Hawthorne made it sound like community development, helping the neighborhood upgrade and modernize. It wasn't until I started pressuring families to sell that I realized what I'd become. The conversation continued as they shared the dumplings. Bryce's story revealing a young man who'd lost his moral compass while trying to build security after childhood trauma. His parents' death had left him terrified of vulnerability, and Hawthorne had exploited that fear with surgical precision. Every bully I ever became, Bryce admitted, was just me trying not to be the scared 16-year-old whose world fell apart in a car accident. Jackie's response came not through words, but through action. He cleared the kitchen table and began teaching Bryce traditional forms that emphasized patience over power, control over dominance. The movements were deceptively simple, flowing. Exercises that looked more like meditation than combat training. Martial arts is not about never falling, Jackie explained as he guided Bryce through a sequence that required perfect balance. It's about falling with grace, getting up with dignity, helping others do the same. Over the following days, their training sessions became lessons in more than physical technique. Jackie taught Bryce to find strength in protecting others rather than dominating them, to build confidence through service rather than victory. The young man proved to be a dedicated student, arriving each morning before dawn to practice forms that gradually reshaped his understanding of what strength meant. You were never truly Hawthorne's soldier, Jackie observed during one session, as Bryce demonstrated newfound patience while teaching basic techniques to neighborhood children. You were a prisoner who forgot he had key to his own cell. By week's end, Bryce was leading children's classes at the community center with gentle authority that drew respect rather than fear. Parents who'd once avoided his dojo now brought their kids specifically to learn from the young man who'd found his way back to honor. The transformation was remarkable, but Jackie knew their hardest test was still coming: the Queen's Daily News. Building buzzed with anticipation as Linda Kowalski put the finishing touches on her exposé, the keyboard clicking under her fingers like machine gun fire. Jackie stood behind her workstation, marveling at the wall of evidence they'd assembled: bank records, email correspondence, recorded conversations, and witness statements that painted an undeniable picture of systematic corruption spanning 2 years. Front page, above the fold, confirmed Linda's editor, Harold Martinez, as he reviewed the final layout. FBI Public Corruption Unit is standing by to receive our documentation the moment this hits the streets tomorrow morning. The article's headline dominated the mock-up: Community Killer, Developers' Corruption Empire Exposed. Below it, photographs showed the progression of Hawthorne's destruction: thriving community centers reduced to rubble, elderly residents displaced from neighborhoods they'd called home for decades, and luxury developments rising from the ashes of cultural institutions. Margaret Walsh arrived with the community center's legal team, 3 pro bono attorneys who'd volunteered there. Services after Linda's initial inquiries had reached sympathetic ears in the legal community. Jackie had called in favors from his Hollywood connections, and within hours they'd assembled a formidable defense that would have cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. "The injunctions are filed and ready," announced lead attorney Sarah Chun, spreading court documents across Linda's desk. "The moment this story breaks, we'll have federal judges reviewing every inspection report, every city council vote, and every property transfer involving Hawthorne's companies." Jackie studied the evidence with quiet satisfaction. Hawthorne's careful system of plausible deniability had crumbled under professional investigation. The timing of bribes, the coordination between corrupt officials, and the systematic targeting of vulnerable communities created a pattern that would fascinate federal prosecutors. "What's our timeline?" Margaret asked, her voice carrying hope. "For the first time in weeks. Story breaks at 6 a.m. when the paper hits the stands," Linda replied. "FBI arrests should begin by 8. Your building's condemnation hearing is scheduled for this afternoon, but with federal agents questioning the inspectors who signed off on the violations, that proceeding will be postponed indefinitely." The community center's salvation seemed assured as they reviewed their strategy. Linda's article would trigger federal intervention that would save not just their building, but potentially dozens of properties across the city. The corrupt officials would face justice, and Hawthorne's entire operation would collapse under the weight of its own illegality. At 5 p.m., the community gathered for what they believed was a victory celebration. Children performed martial arts demonstrations showcasing Jackie's teachings, while the elderly residents displayed newfound confidence and unity. Mrs. Kim presented Jackie with a specially quilted wall hanging featuring scenes from their neighborhood's history. "To Mr. Chun," Margaret toasted, raising a glass of sparkling cider, "our guardian angel who reminded us that heroes come in unexpected packages." The applause was thunderous as Linda raised her own glass to the triumph of truth over corruption. Jackie felt genuinely moved by their celebration, watching 3 generations of his adopted community sharing hope and determination. Outside, unnoticed in the gathering dusk, a black SUV waited with its engine running and darkened windows that reflected the community center's warm lights like dead eyes. That Jackie's eyes snapped open at 3:17 a.m. to the sound of his apartment door's lock being picked with professional precision. Decades of stunt work had trained him to wake instantly and assess threats, but the methodical scratching of metal on metal suggested someone with military expertise rather than common burglary skills. He rolled silently from his narrow bed, bare feet finding the cold linoleum as his visitor completed the break-in. Rex Morrison moved through Jackie's modest apartment like a ghost, his black tactical clothing making him nearly invisible in the pre-dawn darkness. The former Special Forces operative worked with surgical efficiency, photographing documents, copying computer files, and systematically searching for the evidence that would destroy his employer's carefully constructed empire. Jackie attempted to stop the intrusion quietly, not wanting to wake Mrs. Chun in the apartment below or alert the elderly residents who lived throughout the building. But Morrison had anticipated resistance, turning to face Jackie with the cold confidence of someone trained to kill efficiently and without remorse. The fight that followed was brief but brutal. Morrison's modern military training emphasized maximum damage in minimum time, strikes designed to incapacitate or eliminate threats with mechanical precision. Jackie's traditional martial arts focused on redirection and control, but Morrison's superior strength and ruthless technique gradually overwhelmed the older man's defensive skills. Morrison escaped through the fire escape with Jackie's laptop, backup drives, and copies of every document they'd assembled against Hawthorne. But his real message came in the form of a burner phone left behind on Jackie's kitchen table, its screen displaying a video that made Jackie's blood freeze. Margaret Walsh sat tied to a metal chair in what appeared to be an industrial warehouse, her eyes wide with terror above a strip of duct tape covering her mouth. The camera angle revealed concrete floors, exposed beams, and the kind of construction equipment that could easily dispose of evidence or witnesses. That Morrison's voice came from the phone's speaker with the flat emotion of someone reading a grocery list. Mr. Chan, you have 18 hours to publicly endorse Victor Hawthorne's development project at tomorrow night's city council meeting. Tell them the community center is unsafe and should be demolished for the public good. Bring no backup, contact no authorities, make no copies of this message. The camera panned to show Morrison's face, revealing cold eyes that held no trace of humanity. If you comply, Mrs. Walsh will be released unharmed and your journalist friend's story will be discontinued. If you refuse, or if any law enforcement becomes involved, the elderly woman dies slowly and very painfully. Jackie's hands shook as he watched Margaret struggle against her bonds, her muffled cries barely audible through the phone's tinny speakers. The video ended with Morrison's final threat. You have until 8 p.m. tomorrow to decide whether your principles are worth more than her life. The phone screen went black, leaving Jackie alone in his ransacked apartment with the weight of an impossible choice. Save Margaret and doom the community to Hawthorne's predations, or fight for justice and watch an innocent woman pay the ultimate price for his defiance. Outside, dawn was breaking over Queens, but for Jackie Chan, the darkness was just beginning. The Hawthorne Industries warehouse complex squatted against the Queens skyline like a concrete cancer, its industrial bulk blocking out stars that had once guided travelers to safety. Jackie arrived at the specified midnight hour, his footsteps echoing across empty pavement as security lights tracked his approach with mechanical precision. The main entrance stood open like a mouth waiting to swallow him, its darkness promising nothing but pain. He walked through the doorway with hands visible, calling into the echoing space. I am here, as requested. Let us finish this honorably. Morrison's voice drifted from hidden speakers positioned throughout the cavernous building, creating an omnipresent threat that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Honor is a luxury for people who can afford it. Mr. Chan, tonight you'll learn that money and violence always defeat principles and philosophy. The warehouse stretched before Jackie like a three-dimensional maze designed by someone who understood tactical advantages. Towering shelves created narrow corridors perfect for ambushes, while forklifts and industrial equipment provided both obstacles and improvised weapons. Construction scaffolding reached toward the distant ceiling, creating multiple levels of engagement that would test every aspect of Jackie's legendary abilities. Security cameras mounted on every surface tracked his movement with predatory patience. Jackie could feel Morrison watching from somewhere above, studying his gait for signs of weakness, cataloging potential strategies, planning the most efficient way to break the aging legend who dared to challenge Victor Hawthorne's empire. The rules are simple. Morrison's amplified voice continued as Jackie penetrated deeper into the building. 3 levels, each more challenging than the last. Reach Mrs. Walsh at the top, and maybe we'll discuss terms. Fail at any point, and she pays for your inadequacy. The warehouse's main floor opened into a space the size of an aircraft hangar, filled with machinery that hummed with barely contained power. Paint cans stacked 20 feet high created artificial walls, while conveyor belts snaked between islands of equipment that could serve as platforms or weapons depending on perspective. Chain hoists dangled from overhead tracks like metallic Vines and hydraulic lifts created adjustable terrain that could shift without warning. Jackie studied the environment with the eye of someone who'd spent 50 years turning hostile spaces into personal playgrounds. Every object was a potential ally. The paint cans could become projectiles or shields, the chains offered mobility options, and the machinery provided both cover and elevation advantages. Morrison had chosen this battleground to showcase the superiority of modern military tactics over traditional martial arts, but he'd made one crucial miscalculation. He'd given Jackie exactly the kind of creative environment where legends were born. Level 1 begins now, Morrison announced, and the first wave of attackers emerged from behind the machinery like shadows given form. 6 men in tactical gear moved with coordinated precision, their positions carefully planned to eliminate escape routes and force Jackie into a killing zone where superior numbers could overwhelm individual skill. They were competent professionals, not the street thugs Jackie had faced in countless films, but trained operatives who understood teamwork and tactical communication. But as the first guard rushed forward with a telescoping baton, Jackie smiled. For the first time since receiving Morrison's ultimatum, the warehouse around him wasn't a trap, it was a playground. And after 5 decades of making the impossible look effortless, he was about to remind everyone why some legends earned their reputations the hard way. Jackie caught a paint can as it fell from a damaged stack, spun it once in his hands to test its weight, and then did what he'd always done best. He turned an ordinary object into something extraordinary. The battle for Margaret's life and the soul of their community had finally begun. Above them, Morrison watched from his command position, confident that tonight would prove money and violence always triumphed over honor, and hoped that he was about to learn otherwise. The first security guard's baton whistled through the air where Jackie's head had been a heartbeat before, striking sparks from a concrete pillar as Jackie rolled beneath a nearby forklift. The paint can in his hands became an extension of his will as he emerged on the machine's opposite side, using the container to deflect a second guard's strike while simultaneously vaulting onto the forklift's seat from his elevated position. Jackie could see the tactical formation Morrison's men had assumed, a classic military pattern designed to eliminate escape routes and concentrate firepower. But what worked against conventional opponents failed spectacularly against someone who treated vertical space as just another dimension of movement. Jackie launched himself from the forklift onto a chain hoist, swinging across the warehouse floor. Like a gymnast as 2 guards collided beneath him, their coordinated advance disrupted by his unexpected aerial approach. He released the chain at the perfect moment, landing atop a stack of paint cans that became an avalanche of colorful chaos as he kicked them toward his pursuers. The warehouse floor transformed into a slippery obstacle course as paint cans burst open, their contents creating a rainbow-slick surface that turned the guards' tactical boots into liability. Jackie moved across the chaos with the sure-footed grace of someone who'd spent decades calculating impossible physics, while his opponents struggled to maintain their footing on the treacherous terrain that a ladder became his dance partner as he used it to pole vault over a guard's tackle attempt, then spun it horizontally to sweep 2 more attackers off their feet. The movements were pure Jackie Chan, turning everyday objects into elegant weapons through timing and creativity rather than brute force. One guard adapted quickly, using the warehouse's scaffolding to gain elevation and rain down attacks from above. Jackie responded by activating a hydraulic lift platform, rising to meet his opponent in a vertical duel that showcased both men's agility. The guard's military training emphasized efficiency and lethality, but Jackie's stunt background allowed him to fight while balancing on a platform barely 2 feet square. The remaining guards tried to overwhelm him through coordinated assault, but Jackie used the warehouse's conveyor belt system to control the engagement's pace and spacing. He ran along the moving belts, reversing direction without warning, using the machinery's rhythm to confuse opponents who expected static combat positions. That a paint can filled with brushes became a temporary flail as Jackie swung it to block multiple attackers, the brushes creating a defensive screen that obscured vision while the can's weight provided stopping power. When the makeshift weapon finally broke apart, Jackie seamlessly transitioned to using the individual brushes as striking tools, their wooden handles perfect for pressure point attacks that left guards conscious but effectively paralyzed. The first level's climax came as Jackie faced the two remaining guards simultaneously. Using the chain hoists like a three-dimensional web, he swung between them while they tried to coordinate their attacks, turning their teamwork against them as they struck each other instead of their elusive target. The final guard fell when Jackie used a forklift's hydraulics to catapult himself over the man's head, landing behind him to apply a sleeper hold that left the operative unconscious but uninjured on the paint-slicked floor. Morrison's voice echoed from the speakers with grudging respect. "Impressive, Mr. Chan. But level 1 was just a warm-up. The real test begins now." Above Jackie, machinery activated with ominous grinding sounds as the warehouse reconfigured itself for the next phase. Conveyor belts began moving in complex patterns. Hydraulic platforms shifted to create an ever-changing landscape, and new opponents emerged from concealment points throughout the building's second level. Jackie wiped sweat from his forehead, his breathing slightly labored but his spirit undaunted. Margaret was still somewhere above him, and every second of delay increased her danger. The legend was just getting started. The warehouse's third level felt like entering a gladiatorial arena designed by someone who understood that legends deserved legendary challenges. Rex Morrison stood alone on a platform surrounded by dangerous machinery. Hydraulic presses that could crush steel, automated cutting tools that sparked with electric menace, and conveyor systems that formed a maze of moving death around the confined space. Margaret sat bound and gagged on an elevated platform 20 feet above Morrison's position, her terrified eyes following Jackie's approach as he navigated the mechanical obstacle course. The message was clear. One mistake would cost more than just his own life. Morrison had removed his tactical jacket, revealing a physique sculpted by years of special forces conditioning and combat deployment. At 40, he possessed the perfect combination of experience and physical prime, while his training emphasized ending fights quickly through maximum damage and psychological intimidation. 25 years of military service, Morrison called out as Jackie stepped onto the platform. 8 deployments, 43 confirmed kills, and enough hand-to-hand training to break men half your age. He assumed a fighting stance that radiated lethal competence. "Your movie magic won't save you here, old man." Jackie studied his opponent with the careful attention of someone who'd faced dangerous men in contexts where mistakes were permanent. Morrison moved with the controlled violence of a soldier trained to kill efficiently, his every gesture economical and purposeful. This wasn't going to be the playful redirection Jackie had used against Bryce. This was survival against someone who viewed mercy as weakness. The first exchange established the brutal reality of their mismatch. Morrison's opening combination, a feint followed by a devastating elbow strike, would have ended most fights instantly. Jackie barely managed to deflect the attack, absorbing enough impact to send shock waves through his 70-year-old frame. Morrison pressed his advantage. With relentless efficiency, his strikes designed to accumulate damage rather than seek single knockout blows. A knee to Jackie's ribs cracked bone, while a precisely placed hook opened a cut above his left eye that sent blood streaming down his face. But Jackie's decades of stunt work had taught him to absorb punishment while maintaining focus. He used the platform's machinery to his advantage, ducking behind a hydraulic press as Morrison's powerful straight punch shattered the safety glass of a control panel. Sparks showered the platform as Jackie rolled beneath a conveyor belt, using its moving surface to confuse Morrison's tracking. The younger man adapted quickly, cutting off Jackie's escape routes with calculated positioning that forced the aging legend into increasingly desperate defensive measures. Morrison's military training had prepared him for exactly this scenario, overwhelming a skilled but aging opponent through superior conditioning and systematic pressure. Jackie found himself backed against a safety railing with nowhere to retreat as Morrison closed in for the finishing sequence. A brutal combination to the body doubled Jackie over, leaving him vulnerable to the rising knee strike that would have ended everything. But in that moment of apparent defeat, Jackie heard something that changed everything: the distant sound of vehicles approaching the warehouse at high speed, engines racing through the night toward their isolated battleground. Morrison heard it too, his concentration flickering for just an instant as he processed the implications. That split second of distraction was all Jackie needed, not to win, but to survive long enough for help to arrive. The legendary martial artist caught Morrison's knee strike, redirected the younger man's momentum, and sent him stumbling toward the platform's edge just as the warehouse doors exploded inward below them. Bryce Kellerman's voice echoed through the building as he led the charge. "Mr. Chun, we're here." Morrison's expression shifted from confident dominance to calculating concern as he realized the odds had just changed dramatically. Above them, Margaret's muffled cries grew louder as she sensed rescue approaching. The real battle was about to begin. The warehouse doors burst open like the breaking of a dam, releasing a flood of community spirit that transformed the industrial space into a battlefield of generations united. Bryce Kellerman led the charge with his martial arts students, their black uniforms creating a disciplined wedge that cut through Morrison's remaining security forces. Behind them came Marcus Thompson and 6 teenagers, moving with the coordinated precision Jackie had taught them during countless after-school sessions. Eddie Rodriguez appeared through a side entrance, his maintenance skills having unlocked service doors that Morrison's security had overlooked. The 72-year-old veteran moved through the warehouse's infrastructure like he owned it, using fire escapes and utility ladders to reach elevated positions where he could disable machinery and create chaos among the remaining guards. Even Mrs. Kim had come, leading a group of elderly immigrants who'd armed themselves with the improvised weapons Jackie had taught them to create from household items. Rolling pins became batons, knitting needles turned into pressure point tools, and kitchen timers provided coordinated signals for their synchronized attacks. "Spread out and secure the exits," Bryce commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd finally found his true purpose. His students moved with disciplined efficiency, applying the teamwork principles Jackie had taught them to overwhelm individual guards through superior coordination. Marcus and his teenage crew demonstrated the environmental fighting techniques they'd absorbed like sponges, using the warehouse's own equipment against Morrison's forces. They swung from chains, slid down conveyor belts, and turned paint cans into projectiles with the creative violence of young people defending their community patriarch. The seniors proved most surprising of all. Frank Morrison, despite his 89 years in Walker, positioned himself strategically to control a key choke point, using his military experience to direct younger fighters while wielding his mobility aid like a quarterstaff. Helen Patterson, barely 5 feet tall, systematically disabled security cameras with a precision that suggested extensive practice. Eddie's parkour training proved invaluable as he moved through the warehouse's upper levels, cutting power to sections of machinery and creating the kind of environmental chaos that played directly into Jackie's strengths. His knowledge of building systems turned every electrical panel and mechanical control into a tactical advantage. The battle became a multi-generational symphony of resistance. Teenagers used their agility to outmaneuver guards who'd trained to fight conventional opponents, while seniors employed cunning and teamwork to overcome physical limitations. Bryce's students provided the disciplined force needed to break through organized resistance, and the immigrant grandmothers proved that protective fury knew no age limits. Morrison's remaining security forces found themselves overwhelmed not by superior firepower, but by sheer numbers and unexpected tactics. Guards trained to handle individual threats or small teams couldn't adapt to facing an entire community that fought with coordinated purpose. Mrs. Kim herself cornered one guard who'd been terrorizing a group of teenagers, wielding her quilting scissors with surgical precision to convince him that surrender was his safest option. "You pick wrong neighborhood, young man," she told him with steel in her voice. The warehouse that had been designed as Jackie's tomb became instead a demonstration of everything he'd taught them about community, courage, and the strength that came from protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Each person contributed their unique abilities. Marcus's natural leadership, Eddie's technical knowledge, Bryce's disciplined force, and the seniors' combination of wisdom and fearless determination. The last of Morrison's ground forces surrendered or fled. The community converged on the central platform, where their teacher continued his desperate battle against the man who'd thought he could terrorize them into submission. Above them all, Margaret Walsh watched with tears of pride as her neighbors transformed from potential victims into a unified force that no amount of money or corruption could defeat. The warehouse echoed with the sound of ordinary people doing extraordinary things in defense of their community's heart. With his security team neutralized and escape routes cut off, Morrison grabbed Margaret from her chair and pressed the barrel of his service pistol against her temple. The elderly woman's muffled cries through her gag echoed across the platform as Morrison backed toward a service ladder that led to the warehouse's roof access, his military training dictating tactical withdrawal when overwhelming force made victory impossible. Jackie pursued them through the warehouse's upper levels, navigating a vertical maze of maintenance catwalks, crane systems, and precariously balanced construction materials. Morrison moved with desperate efficiency, using Margaret as a human shield while climbing toward the building's highest point, where the distant sound of helicopter rotors grew steadily louder. The chase became a three-dimensional puzzle that showcased both men's unique skills. Morrison's military precision allowed him to ascend quickly while maintaining control of his hostage, but Jackie's stunt background gave him creative options that conventional tactics couldn't predict. He swung from crane cables, used conveyor belt systems to gain altitude, and turned the warehouse's own infrastructure into an impromptu obstacle course at a T1 point. Morrison attempted to slow Jackie's pursuit by activating a massive overhead crane, its heavy hooks swinging in dangerous arcs that could crush anyone caught in its path. Jackie responded by using the crane's own momentum to propel himself higher, catching the moving hook and riding it like a pendulum to reach the next level. "You should have stayed retired, old man," Morrison shouted as they climbed, his voice strained from the effort of controlling Margaret while maintaining his tactical advantage. This is what happens when legends forget they're mortal. The warehouse's roof access opened onto a flat expanse of concrete and mechanical equipment, with Hawthorne's private helicopter hovering 50 feet away like a mechanical vulture waiting to feast on the night's carnage. The aircraft's spotlight swept across the rooftop, creating stark shadows that danced between ventilation units and satellite equipment. Victor Hawthorne leaned out of the helicopter's passenger compartment, his expensive suit incongruous against the industrial backdrop as he surveyed the chaos below. His cold smile suggested someone watching an investment finally pay dividends, confident that Morrison's extraction would eliminate the last threat to his systematic destruction of Queens communities. "Bring me the old woman," Hawthorne's amplified voice carried over the helicopter's rotor wash. "Leave the has-been actor for the authorities to find in the morning." Morrison dragged Margaret toward the aircraft's hovering position, but Jackie's pursuit had closed the distance to barely 20 feet. The platform beneath them was a maze of rooftop equipment, air conditioning units, electrical transformers, and communication arrays that created both obstacles and opportunities. Jackie used a ventilation fan housing to vault over Morrison's defensive position, landing between the soldier and his escape route with fluid grace that belied his 70 years. For a moment, the three figures were frozen in a deadly tableau. Morrison with his gun pressed against Margaret's head, Hawthorne watching from his mechanical perch, and Jackie calculating odds that seemed impossibly stacked against survival. "One more step and she dies," Morrison warned, his finger tightening on the trigger as sweat mixed with blood on his face. The confident soldier who'd entered the warehouse had been replaced by a desperate man facing the collapse of everything he'd been paid to protect. Above them, Hawthorne's helicopter adjusted its position, the aircraft's door gunner visible as a silhouette against the night sky. The developer had come prepared for total elimination of witnesses, and his cold expression suggested that Margaret's life meant no more to him than the demolition of another community building. Jackie stood motionless in the rotor wash, his mind racing through possibilities as time ran out for the woman who'd dedicated her life to serving others. The final confrontation was about to begin. The helicopter's rotor wash whipped across the rooftop as Jackie stood motionless, his hands raised in apparent surrender while his mind calculated angles, distances, and the precise timing needed to save Margaret's life. Morrison's finger remained tight on the trigger, his desperation making him more dangerous than any trained confidence could achieve. "Smart choice, old man," Morrison called over the mechanical thunder above them. "Now step back and watch how real power handles problems." But Jackie wasn't retreating. He was positioning himself for one perfect moment that would require 50 years of experience to execute flawlessly. Instead of moving away, He began speaking in the calm voice of someone who understood that words could be weapons more powerful than fists. "Sergeant Morrison," Jackie said, using the man's military rank with deliberate respect. "You served 8 deployments protecting innocent people from predators. What would your squad think of who you have become?" The question hit Morrison like a physical blow, his grip on Margaret faltering slightly as memories of honorable service warred with his current reality. Jackie pressed his psychological advantage, each word carefully chosen to crack the armor of justification Morrison had built around his corruption. "You swore oath to defend those who cannot defend themselves. Margaret Walsh, she serves veterans like you once were. Korean War survivors, Vietnam heroes, men who came home broken and found healing in community she helped build." Morrison's hand trembled as Jackie continued, his voice carrying across the rooftop with the authority of someone who'd spent decades understanding what truly motivated good men to make terrible choices. "Hawthorne pays you to terrorize the same people you once protected. But money cannot buy back honor once it is sold. Only right action can restore what was lost." Above them, Hawthorne screamed orders to shoot both Jackie and Margaret, but Morrison's military discipline was cracking under the weight of Jackie's words. The soldier who'd once served with distinction was remembering why he'd been willing to die for strangers in foreign lands. Jackie saw the exact moment when Morrison's resolve wavered, a micro-expression of doubt that lasted perhaps a tenth of a second. That infinitesimal hesitation was all the legendary martial artist needed. Moving with speed that belonged to someone half his age, Jackie caught Morrison's gun hand and redirected it skyward just as the weapon discharged harmlessly into the night. Simultaneously, he used his free hand to cut Margaret's bonds while spinning her away from danger, the entire sequence flowing together like choreographed poetry. Morrison, freed from his hostage burden but disarmed, faced Jackie in honest combat for the first time. Without Hawthorne's money and threats as motivation, the former soldier fought with decreasing conviction against an opponent whose moral authority grew stronger with each exchange. The confrontation ended when Jackie used Morrison's own momentum to send him stumbling toward the rooftop's edge, not to kill, but to demonstrate the futility of fighting against justice. Morrison caught himself short of falling, then looked up to find Jackie offering a hand to help him regain his footing. "Choice is still yours, Sergeant," Jackie said simply. "Serve money or serve honor. But choose quickly." Above them, Hawthorne's helicopter began to retreat as its pilot realized the extraction had failed and federal vehicles were approaching the warehouse with sirens wailing. The developer's last glimpse was of his perfect soldier accepting Jackie's offered hand, his face showing the first hint of genuine respect he'd felt in years. Morrison removed his tactical vest and dropped his remaining weapons, then helped Jackie untie Margaret completely. The elderly woman collapsed into Jackie's arms, sobbing with relief as the helicopter's lights disappeared into the Queen's night sky. Below them, the community that had come to rescue their protector now cheered from the warehouse floor, their voices carrying across the industrial landscape like a song of victory that money could never silence. Honor had triumphed over corruption, and legends had proven they never truly fade. 3 days later, Victor Hawthorne's arrest unfolded with the methodical precision of a federal investigation that had been building for months. FBI agents surrounded his penthouse office at dawn, their badges gleaming in the morning sunlight as they presented warrants that detailed charges spanning racketeering, bribery, conspiracy, and civil rights violations. The man who'd terrorized communities across Queens now sat in handcuffs, his expensive suit wrinkled and his cold composure finally cracked. Linda Kowalski's expose had triggered an avalanche of federal action that swept through city government like a cleansing fire. By noon, 3 building inspectors, 2 city council members, and a planning commission chairman had joined Hawthorne in federal custody. The FBI's public corruption unit had been building cases against several targets for months, but Linda's documentation and the community center incident had provided the final evidence needed for prosecution. Jackie stood with Margaret and the assembled community outside Hawthorne's corporate headquarters, watching federal agents remove box after box of evidence from offices that had once seemed untouchable. Children who'd learned courage in Jackie's classes now played in the shadow of justice being served, while elderly residents who'd faced displacement with dignity witnessed their tormentor's downfall. 37 properties, announced FBI agent Patricia Vance, reading from a preliminary report to the gathered crowd. Fraudulent inspections, forged violations, and systematic displacement of elderly and immigrant communities. Mr. Hawthorne's operation represents one of the largest municipal corruption schemes we've encountered. The domino effect extended far beyond Hawthorne's immediate organization. Shell companies dissolved overnight as their illegal foundations crumbled, corrupt city contracts were voided, and dozens of fraudulent property seizures were reversed through emergency court orders. Families who'd lost their homes to Hawthorne's manufactured violations would receive compensation and the opportunity to reclaim what had been stolen. Margaret Walsh received a personal call from the mayor's office, apologizing for the city's role in the attempted seizure and announcing emergency funding for community center renovations. The building that had faced demolition would now receive a complete modernization while preserving its historic character and community mission. Federal Detention Center, Brooklyn. Jackie made an unexpected visit to Rex Morrison's holding cell. The former soldier sat quietly on his narrow bunk, reading a book on martial arts philosophy that Jackie had provided along with a character reference letter for Morrison's sentencing hearing. "What?" Morrison asked, his voice stripped of the aggressive confidence that had once defined him. "After everything I did to you, to your community, why help me?" Jackie settled onto the cell's single chair, his presence somehow making the sterile space feel less oppressive. Because good man lost his way is not same as evil man choosing darkness. You served with honor once. Perhaps you can serve with honor again. Morrison's cooperation with federal prosecutors had proven invaluable, his testimony providing insight into Hawthorne's methods and identifying other communities at risk. The information he provided would save dozens of properties and prevent hundreds of families from facing the displacement Margaret's neighborhood had nearly suffered. "My grandmother always said redemption wasn't about forgetting the past," Morrison reflected, holding up Jackie's philosophy book. "It was about choosing better actions for the future." Bryce Kellerman had made his own choice, formally partnering his dojo with the community center to provide free martial arts instruction for anyone who needed it. His academy's expensive equipment now served children whose families couldn't afford traditional lessons, while his teaching philosophy emphasized Jackie's lessons about strength serving others rather than dominating them. The transformation was remarkable. The young man who'd entered the community center as a bully now helped elderly residents carry groceries, taught teenagers discipline alongside self-defense, and discovered that building others up provided satisfaction no championship trophy could match. As evening fell over Queens, Jackie watched the community center's lights illuminate faces that reflected hope instead of fear, strength instead of vulnerability, and unity instead of division. Justice, it seemed, was indeed worth fighting. 4.6 months later, the Riverside Community Center's annual spring celebration buzzed with an energy that would have been impossible to imagine during those dark October days when demolition seemed inevitable. The building itself gleamed with fresh paint and modern safety features, but its soul remained unchanged, a place where generations gathered to support each other and build something stronger than any individual could create alone. Jackie stood at the front of the main hall, watching his multi-generational martial arts class demonstrate the harmony possible when age and youth learned from each other. Mrs. Kim, now 83, moved through Tai Chi forms beside Marcus Thompson, whose college acceptance letter hung proudly on the community bulletin board. Their movements flowed together like a conversation between past and future, each learning from the other's unique strengths. Bryce knelt patiently with a group of 6-year-olds, his voice gentle as he helped them master basic stances. The young man who'd once terrorized elderly residents now spent his evenings teaching children that true strength meant protecting others, and parents who'd once feared his aggressive reputation now trusted him with their most precious treasures. Eddie Rodriguez led his youth parkour program in the building's new gymnasium, showing teenagers how to navigate urban environments with confidence and purpose. Frank Morrison, despite his 89 years, served as the program's safety coordinator, his military experience ensuring that adventure never became recklessness. Linda Kowalski had become more than an occasional volunteer, teaching journalism classes that emphasized community service over sensationalism. Her Pulitzer Prize nomination for the Hawthorne Expose hung modestly in her corner office, but she treasured her honorary community member certificate from Margaret more highly. Margaret herself moved through the celebration with renewed energy, announcing that construction would soon begin on the building's expansion wing. The new addition would include a dedicated martial arts studio, funded by donations from Jackie's Hollywood friends and matching grants from a city government eager to support communities they'd once helped. Threatened that a young girl approached Jackie during the festivities, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Mr. Chun, my mom says you used to be in movies. Is that true?" Jackie smiled, his weathered hands gently adjusting her practice uniform. "Sometimes the most important roles are the ones nobody sees, little one. Heroes are not people who fight for cameras. They are people who fight for each other." The camera pulled back through the community center's windows, revealing the thriving neighborhood beyond. In the distance, construction workers were putting finishing touches on affordable housing that would replace Hawthorne's planned luxury towers. The community had not just survived, it had learned to protect itself, and in quiet apartments throughout Queens, families slept safely, knowing that heroes sometimes came disguised as humble volunteers who fixed boilers and taught gentle exercise classes to anyone who needed them. If you like the story, please watch another story on our channel and subscribe to the channel.